everyone, it's John from What Up, and welcome back to another video. And this will be my review of Season 2, Episode 2, Sony and Amazon's Wheel of Time show. Now, how I do my reviews is very simple. The first half of this review will be completely spoiler-free. I'll talk about the things I liked and didn't like in a very general sense about the episode. So if you haven't watched it yet or you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, don't worry about that. I'll be talking about things in a way that won't spoil the episode. Then about halfway through, we'll chuck up the spoiler warning for you folks, and then we'll dive right into specific examples of things I liked and didn't like from the episode, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth that way. I also rate the episode, give it a rating out of 10. And for those of you who are new to the channel, we talk Wheel of Time here. That's what we do. So thank you so much for finding us if you're here for the first time. But we're doing reviews, episode breakdowns, and Easter eggs for each and every single one of the Season 2 episodes that drop. We're also doing news. If there's any new Wheel of Time news that drops the next couple of weeks during Season 2, we're going to talk about that. And then as soon as Season 2 ends, we're jumping right back into leaks. I have a whole bunch of Season 3 leaks stockpiled for you folks. They will be coming out after Episode 8 airs of Season 2. You're not going to want to miss that, so if you're not already subscribed, please do so, and of course, like the video if you like what I'm doing here. Now, before I actually get into the review, I have to give a little bit of a PSA here. I do it at the beginning of every single one of my review videos. I review the show based on the merits of the show as if it were just a show and nothing else. I do not comment on, or I do not let the aspect of changes from the source material influence my reviews. So just because a change had happened, whether I like it, dislike it, agree with it, or don't agree with it, it does not affect my review in any way, shape, or form because I'm reviewing the show based on the merits of the show. Now, anyone that's new to the channel, thank you for joining us, but I am generally a very positive person. I do love the show immensely, but I also love the book series, which is why I try not to let my love of one bleed into the love of the other when I do my reviews, because it's not fair to the show to do so. All right, so spoiler-free review time. For you folks who haven't seen it yet, this is a great episode. It is not quite as good as the first episode. For those of you who don't remember or maybe haven't seen my review of episode 1 just yet, I gave it an 8 out of 10, and it was, in my opinion, a banger of an episode. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, a great way to start off the season. But many of the things that they did in episode 1 properly or right, in my opinion, carried over to episode 2. The sets again in episode 2 were fantastic. They all gave the sense of size. So even when you were indoors in small rooms, there were a couple of instances in this episode where the whole set was a very small room, and it was meant to feel small. You didn't feel cramped or feel like it was a television show set when you were watching it on screen. They did a very good job of making it feel bigger and wider and more connected to everything else. So things in the tower felt connected to the tower. Things outside the locations, they bled right into the indoor sets perfectly, which leads me to talk about editing, cinematography, and cutting together of the episode. It went very, very well for the most part. I would say that almost all the editing in this particular episode was top-notch. The way they transitioned from one scene to the next, from one character scene to the next, was still reminiscent, like I said in episode 1, of chapters of a book. You spent some time with these characters, you finished that chapter. It was a small, complete story, and then you moved on to the next set of characters, which I really liked. I thought that was the best way to do it. They did not do that in season 1. I didn't enjoy the way they kind of handled those sorts of things. They're doing a very good job of making it not only seem like they're individual storylines, but they're connected in a wider way by making them like chapters of a book. That being said, we're going to talk about the VFX and special effects for this episode. There's a ton of it, and again, handled incredibly well. None of it, in my opinion, was bad. I'm a big practical effects person. I love practical effects. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. I watched a lot of the old 80s slasher flicks, a lot of the old 80s sci-fi movies, and I absolutely love them, cherish them, rewatch them all the time. I love practical effects way more than I like CG. However, if it's CG and I can't tell it's CG, I'm super happy with that. And in this episode, there is a ton of CG, don't get me wrong, but the VFX benefited, I think, from the additional time between season 1 and season 2, because let's face it, it was almost 2 years between season 1 and season 2 for various different reasons, and they really used that time to their advantage. They polished the VFX in these episodes to the nines. They are absolutely perfect when it comes to VFX. The channeling, the threads of the one power, the shadow spawn, the fight scenes, all of it, the background effects, the weather effects that they're adding in, none of it seemed out of place. None of it seemed improper. None of it ruined the immersion for me. And I thought they did a very, very good job of handling it and blending it in properly with practical effects at the same time. Now, something I want to talk about here that I don't normally talk about when it comes to Wheel of Time is lighting. It's not something that I usually bring up in my reviews, and I'm going to tell you right now that this episode lost points due to the lighting. The dark scenes were too dark, in my opinion. The light sources were few and far in between. You really had to crank up the brightness on your TV, at least when I was watching it. Watched it in a dark room, but I have backlights on the TV. Like I have a lighting system that kind of flashes lights on the wall behind it when I'm watching it. It's a pretty good setup, but I still had to strain or watch a little bit closer when the scenes were at night or in dark rooms or things like that. I don't like the way they handled the lighting in this particular episode. I hope it's something that doesn't carry on throughout the rest of the season. So that is my one big complaint about this episode. It was at times too dark. Now, we're not talking Game of Thrones Battle of Winterfell dark. That was just ridiculous. It was probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. But we are talking probably just a little bit too dark to make me enjoy things as much. So like it kind of snapped me out of it, and I had to pay more attention than I would like. Now, that being said, the acting between all the characters was absolutely fantastic. We were introduced to a couple of new cast members during this episode that had a fair bit of screen time, and they not only kept up with everyone else, but in my opinion, they kind of stole the show in such a way that they embodied their characters that made me believe that they were actually the characters on screen. So kudos to them. Like I've said, I've never had a complaint about the acting in the Wheel of Time ever. It's always been top notch as far as I was concerned. And that tradition carries on, especially with new people joining the cast. So I really enjoyed that. Now, all of that being said, there's a whole lot to unpack here, but we did talk about a lot of elements of this that I liked, a couple of things I didn't like. But the last thing I want to mention is pacing. Pacing was the bane of the Wheel of Time's existence for season 1. They had such a hard time with pacing. They had too much to say in too little time. Telling you when Rafe Judkins had mentioned that we're getting an extra couple of minutes per runtime per episode, and I mentioned this in my review for episode 1, I was hopeful that it would help solve some of the problems, but I wasn't sure if a few minutes would do that. They used every second to their advantage. They must have listened to some feedback somewhere about episodes 1 through 8 in the first season, because the pacing in both the first and the second episodes were top notch. Not a minute was wasted, not a second was wasted. There was nothing left undone, nothing cut too early, nothing where they moved away from it and you had to kind of scratch your head and go, I don't really know what they were trying to do there. The pacing from one scene to the next, in my opinion, like I said, was like the chapters of a book. It was perfect. All right. All of that being said, the show was very good. It was a very solid second entry into the season. Not quite as good as the first episode. Don't get me wrong. The first episode was absolutely fantastic. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Remember, I'm likely never going to give it 10 because 10 is perfect TV, and I don't even know if such a thing exists unless you're talking Ash versus Evil Dead. But we won't get into that. Now, for this particular episode, I gave it a 7 out of 10. I thought it was an incredibly solid entry in the series. I thought it was a great follow-up to the first episode and definitely worth your time. Like I've said before, if you're on the fence about coming back for the second season, I would definitely come back. This is incredible TV. It is a very good entry into the fantasy genre, and I would say it is leaps and bounds not only ahead of season 1, but Rings of Power. Rings of Power, although aesthetically pleasing for the most part, was kind of not that great of a show. Wheel of Time is just knocking it out of the park. I think that this should be Amazon's flagship fantasy property, not the Rings of Power. All right. All of that being said, like I said, 7 out of 10, but we're going to get into the spoiler version of the episode now. So if you don't like spoilers, if you haven't seen the episode yet, feel free to dip out. So spoiler warning. In the rest of this video, we're going to talk about specific examples from season 2, episode 2 rather, of the Wheel of Time that I liked and that I didn't like. And I'm going to provide examples that are likely going to ruin plot points and character arcs from the episode. All right, let's get on to the rest of the review. All right, gloves are off. We're talking spoilers now, so if you haven't seen the episode, you've been warned. We're going to dive into specific spoilers. So, like I said, everything in the initial part of the review stands. I love this episode. I thought it was a solid entry, 7 out of 10. Characters. Let's talk about some of the new characters. Donald Finn as Matt Cawthon. Absolutely fantastic. Now, I was a big fan of Barney Harris in season 1. I really was. A lot of people were. He was a fan favorite. In fact, he was some of the best parts of season 1, in my opinion. Donald Finn is hands down way better at Matt Cawthon than Barney Harris was. The delivery, the hand movements, the gestures, he totally understands the motivations behind the character. And I'm not going to say he's comic relief, but there are some very funny moments in this episode where Matt is just being Matt because that's how he is. And Donald Finn really embodies the character. Now, from what I understand is I don't believe he read the books totally before he started took on the role, and he wasn't a huge fan of it, but he nailed Matt cold, just absolutely perfect. I was happy to see Matt on screen. Now, Matt is a big fan favorite. A lot of people love Matt, and I know there are a ton of people out there just picking through the Matt scenes because they love him so much. And I'm actually spending a fair bit of time talking about just Matt in the spoiler part of this review. But the scenes in this episode, he was in a dungeon cell. Like, he was in a cell in the tower. He didn't have much else to do except talk, interact, move a little bit with his hands. Like when you hear the footsteps go away and they're locking all the doors and he's making little motions. Perfect. Absolute pure poetry as far as I'm concerned. Matt was great. Then we have Min. We got to meet Min again in this particular episode. When I say meet her again for the first time, well, we only met her in episode, I believe, 7 and 8 of the first season. We didn't get to see a whole lot with Min. Min is, in my opinion, a perfect casting. She is going to make a very, very good Min. The motivations behind her character may be a little bit different, but she seems to be the same sort of gruff and tumble Min that we know and love from the books. So perfect there. And then we have two other new entries into this this episode that I really want to talk about. The first person I want to talk about is Celine. Celine is perfect. I don't know what else to say. There's been a lot of complaints out there. How are they going to do Lanfear? How is that going to be possible? The way she is handling her infatuation / obsession with Rand, the way that she is handling flashing between anger and love back and forth, I don't think there's a better way to maintain the pure chaos of that character than the way she's doing it. Very, very good. Now, also in this scene, there was a lot more character development. In this episode, rather, there's a lot more character development. We get to spend time with each of the characters, like I said earlier, like it was chapters of a book. Seeing Moiraine and Lan back in Arafel after the healing, speaking with Vandene, not Vandene. Keep using Vandene in place of Adelius. Vandene's not on the show as far as we know. Adelius and Varen. Getting to see them interact there, learning a bit more behind the motivations between their characters, where they're at, hearing a bit more about the precursors to the series, the new spring stuff. All of that made me incredibly happy as a fan. A lot of nice little Easter eggs there. There were a ton of Easter eggs for this entire episode. In fact, I'll cover them in an Easter egg video, but the nods to the fans were plenty. In fact, there were some things that I knew they weren't going to include, such as the flicker scene. We knew we probably wouldn't get something similar to that. But we kind of did a little bit. We saw the flies. We seen the window, the woman in the bloody window, so to speak, as Uno would say. We saw Perrin's wolf brother abilities again, showing things that happened. And the fade nailed to the door. They released that photo not too long ago. We're talking probably within the last 6 months or so. But I had seen it long before then, and that was the first thing that really brought my excitement to crazy heights for season 2. Seeing that and knowing they were going to include something like that is huge fan service. Yes, there's a ton of fan service here. Made me ecstatic, and it shows that the people who make this are fans, and they know what the fans are going to like. And the fans of the book series, they can't include everything. Of course they can't. There's no way that's going to happen. They have to change so many different things to fit it in the runtime and the seasons and budget and all of the different things they have. But the little things they include just make me happy. And in this particular episode, seeing Liandrin cry, something I didn't think that we would see on screen. What they're doing is they're taking all of the Dark Friends, they're taking all of the antagonists from the show, and they're giving them fleshed out backstories where you care about them a bit more. The books were terrible at that, and I've actually seen some people complain online, wow, they're making us feel for the bad guys. That shouldn't happen. No, it 100% should happen. It was one of the failings of Jordan that he didn't do as well as I thought he should in a number of the books, was that the bad guys were cookie cutter. They're not so much. They all have fleshed out backstories. They have motivations. You feel for them. You want to know why they're doing what they're doing. And Liandrin, it's one of those people. You know she's a Dark Friend. You know that she's likely not going to be a good thing going forward, but yet you feel bad for her. Like the scenes in this were so powerful. The sets, again, gorgeous. Like I've said, the set at Arafel, Varen's house, I couldn't tell you how happy I am to see the the orchards outside, the stonework, they picked the locations so well, and the transitions from the outside to the inside, perfect. And again, the tower's the same way. They did a really good job with that. Kyrian, the foregate looks exactly how I expected the foregate to look. It was raucous. It is destitute, desperate, and happy all at the same time. The fact that Rand is working in a sanatorium, as it was so listed in the production material, he's working with men and women that have mental health issues. I think that, although not in the book series, was a great add to put him in there, and he's working with Errol. Who doesn't love Errol right now? Errol is a fan favorite from his brief stint on the show, and the way they talked, it sort of covered the fact that maybe Rand had to learn the sword skills from Lan. Maybe he learned them from Errol, so he does have some ability to use the sword, and he's mentioned sneaking his sword in again to learn some more forms from Errol. I loved that. I loved his interactions with Logain. I don't know what else to say, but Logain is a masterful character, and I can't wait to see him even more on the screen. I think we're going to see more and more Logain than we expect to. Now, all of that being said, like I said, the pacing for this was great. They treated each separate instance of the characters where they were doing the character development, the adaptation as a chapter. I loved that. I super enjoyed it. And like I said earlier, the lighting, not a big fan of the lighting this episode. The dark is too dark when they're in the tower, when they're in their other instances, and there's candlelight, or if there's just torches in the background. The lighting's a little strained, but the battle scenes, especially against the Shan Chan near the end, terrible. Absolutely terrible lighting. I know it's probably on purpose. I get it. I didn't enjoy that kind of lighting. It's hard on the eyes. I'd like it a bit brighter, easier to see. As a viewer, I want to see what's going on rather than have things dark. And they did the same thing at the end of episode 1, where Lan was fighting the two Fades and Moraine was fighting the Fades. Everything was very dark, hard to see. I guess that's to cover some of the CG. I guess that's to cover some of the movements and things that they're doing. But I'd rather it be crisp and clean and have me actually be able to see it. So big points were lost there for me. That's part of the reason why this one got a 7 rather than anything higher, was the lighting itself was just not great. All that being said, though, great episode. Like I said, so far I'm very happy with season 2. Big changes from the book series, and of course you'll see those in my breakdowns. My breakdown for episode 1 is up now. Actually, just uploaded it not long ago, a few hours ago. In my breakdowns, I go through the episode total. I talk about all the changes from the books to the show, where the inspirations came from, some of the scenes are amalgamated, little nods to the fans, things like that. And I talk about where I think things are going and how characters are fitting in. They're longer videos than I normally do. My videos are normally 10 to 20 minutes long. These ones are probably a half hour plus, but they are great. They're full of great information, so make sure you check them out. Now, let me know in the comments down below what you folks think. How would you have rated these two episodes? Like I said, the first one was 8. This one I'm giving it a 7. Solid second entry. And I haven't seen the third just yet as of taping this. But I think from what I've been hearing about rumblings from people who've seen it pre, it's probably even likely better than the first episode, which I can't wait to see. Either way, thank you so very much for sticking with me here to the very end. Here's to many more.